Welcome to Flunking the Written, a fully spoiled Buffy the Vampire Slayer podcast in which two Uber fans break down every episode of the show. Join Kimberly and Megan every other Tuesday as they overanalyze each scene and discuss the Buffyverse at large. Now let's meet up with the Scoobies and get into this episode of Flunking the Written.
What can I say? I flunked the written.
Alright, Kim, and the season premiere of the third season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Which is my favorite season.
This episode, written and directed by Joss Whedon, and the blurb is, now living in the big city, Buffy helps a woman whose boyfriend has mysteriously disappeared, while back in Sunnydale, her friends battle the forces of evil on their own.
Basically it.
Yeah, I'm optimistic that this season's blurbs are going to be better.
Yeah.
Because that's a pretty solid, like, this is what's happening, but I'm not actually going to tell you anything spoilery. But yeah, before we get into the breakdown of the episode, you've already mentioned that this is a favorite, the favorite of yours. Mm-hmm. And you've talked about this a little bit before. But I figure we should probably just take a minute to talk about season 3 and what we're looking forward to before we get into this episode specifically. And I'll let you start since it's your favorite. I'll put you on the spot.
I love this one. I love Faith, and she has the most time in season 3. My absolute favorite episode, the prom, is also in this season. So I love this season. I think it's one of the best seasons of Buffy because it was getting popular and the writers and everything were coming into like a storyline, and that it followed the whole season. They were getting more confident in how they wrote the series. The characters were becoming like having more personality into who they were and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just the beginning of all that, and I love it.
Yeah, it definitely is a turning point for Buffy in general, where the season arc really feels like it's not as interrupted as, like, in season 2, there was a season arc, sure, but sometimes you would just have, like, several episodes before you felt like you were getting back to the season arc. This feels more like every episode. What I'll say about Buffy is, like, the later you get in Buffy, the harder it is to skip episodes of Buffy without missing something important. And I feel like this is when that really starts. This is the first time where there's not very many, like, skippable episodes where you're gonna just follow the season arc story. If you skip certain episodes, you're gonna be missing out on major plot points.
Very true. And one of the things about this episode, like I just said, the characters are they're having more personality and becoming more of who they're going to be. We see almost immediately, as soon as this episode starts, is Willow.
Yeah.
And in this episode, right from the very beginning, she's changed a little bit. She's more confident. She's more friendly, more out there. She's not as self-conscious when she speaks. It's just kind of a difference in her. And that just becomes the new Willow. She's not as mousy.
That's
the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, mousy. This is a very transitional season for a lot of the characters, but especially for Willow. This is a season I'm really excited to get into. This is what I consider to be one of the more polished seasons. It's not even in my top 3. It's like kind of basically I split Buffy into 2 groups. And this is in the bottom of, like, my pinnacle Buffy. But I like season 5 is my favorite. And then I like season 6 and season 2 just barely beat season 3 in a lot of ways. It's because I feel like those are more risk-taking seasons. And I enjoy, like, the risk-taking seasons a lot. And I like analyzing that. So this is going to be fun for me because I haven't really taken time to analyze season 3. It's very polished, but it doesn't necessarily break any new ground at this point. It's just the pinnacle of where all these characters are. And if they had continued to just do this season 3 kind of story arcs over and over again, they may not have had some of the episodes later on that weren't that great, but they may also not have had some of like the big game changer episodes of being willing to take giant risks. And so I tend to gravitate towards the more risk-taking choices that they've made. And so I haven't taken a lot of time to explore season 3, but I mean, it's undeniable that season 3 is a really, really good, well-polished, well-thought-out season.
Yep, I agree. And the group as a whole, like just at the very beginning, and we see that in this episode in Anne, even though they're not all together, they're automatically, it starts out, they're more of a group.
Yeah.
Like Oz is right there in the teaser and is in almost all the scenes of Sunnydale.
Mm-hmm.
And that used to, he would have like one scene an episode.
Yeah.
So we start this off and he's automatically like a Scooby now.
Absolutely.
Like involved and stuff like that. And they did that a little bit with Cordelia, not quite as much as Oz. But for a while, for several episodes, she is too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're ready to jump in this episode. I think it's
okay.
I think it's time. We start in the graveyard, as you do, and yeah, there's a vampire rising out of a grave, and here we have Willow. I just wrote Willow being Bae in my notes, but yeah, like what you said before, automatically you see more confidence coming from her. And she just has a different kind of presence, a different feel.
So she's standing there as the vampire comes out of the grave and she says, "That's right, big boy. Come and get it." Which is hilarious because it's Willow. And then he starts to come toward her and she's like, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that," and starts backing away, which is funny. And then Xander tackles the vampire and tells Oz anytime now to stake him. Oz can't get a hold of a stake. And then we discover that the vampire is some kind of gymnastics expert as he flips over Xander and runs away. And then I love this part where Oz, he gets the stake out and he gets this really, really serious, concentrating look on his face and pulls his arm back to throw the stake through the air, and you think it's going to hit, and it just like bounces off a headstone 2 feet in front of him. It's just hilarious. And so they're fighting vampires without Buffy, but they're not doing a very good job.
Yeah.
But you know who would.
Yeah. I mean, you have this establishing shot at the beginning that's clearly meant to make you think, oh, this is Buffy waiting on a vamp, because that's the place your head goes, right? And then it reveals that it's Willow, and she starts out confident, and you're like, oh, but then you realize that, yeah, these are still just kids. They don't have any kind of superpowers. They just have a certain amount of knowledge. But this is the first time that we really see the Scoobies try to do something like this without Buffy. Now, we've seen Xander patrolling several times with Buffy, but he's usually occupying the ground during those sessions. But we'll get into this a little bit again later on. I find it weird that Giles okayed this.
Yeah. I think so too, and he's not with them.
Yeah, I mean, if Giles was with them, I could totally get it. But like, this is some pretty high risk stuff that they're just doing, and Giles has a little bit of a comment on it later, but for the most part, he seems to just accepting and appreciative of their efforts.
Of course, we could just assume that they said they're going to do it no matter what, and so he couldn't stop.
There's definitely some stuff that happened during the summer that isn't really explained in this episode. Yeah. You just kind of have to assume how stuff was revealed and how these conclusions came about. But this was like, the first time that these, kids are out patrolling without a Slayer, and it seems...
Well, I mean, they mentioned that it's not the first time that
the first time we see him do it.
Yeah, the first time we see him.
And it seems weird that Giles isn't more involved.
I agree. But then we discovered later what Giles is busy doing. Yeah. So apparently he is flying all over the country looking for Buffy.
Yep. So Xander questions Willow's "come and get it, big boy." And they discuss not only is Buffy's Slayer abilities very impressive, but they failed to realize her punning skills, which causes Willow to panic because Xander breaks the past tense rule, which I like that there's enough of this is something that they've been dealing with all summer, established so early on that they have rules like this set in place so they don't upset each other or themselves.
And then they have a little thing Xander says that I think is so odd. But he says, "I can't wait to see Cordelia. I can't believe I can't wait to see Cordelia."
Yeah.
And I was like, they didn't talk to each other the entire summer? What, are we dating in 4th grade? Like, why would they not talk to each other the entire summer?
Because she was on vacation in a remote region that didn't have any phones, clearly.
Or paper and stamps or anything. It's strange because it's just strange because she has a cell phone. Mm-hmm. So she could have called him from anywhere. And it's just odd that they didn't talk to each other all summer. And shows do this a lot.
Yeah.
Where they end the season and then they come back in the fall and kind of we're supposed to think that an entire summer went by, but there was nothing that happened.
Like all the characters were kind of frozen in time. And I will say, the Xander and Cordelia is an example of that. A lot of things in this opener show the passage of time, and I appreciate the things that do show the passage of time.
Yeah, I mean, this is the one thing I noticed that didn't, and it's so odd.
Well,
because like they're so excited to see each other on the first day of school. I mean, I'm assuming she got back to town before midnight the night before. I just don't understand it. It doesn't make sense.
They can't see each other till it's school.
Well, that's what it seems like.
Yeah. They're not the best at communicating. Maybe like Xander just went through random amnesia and forgot where Cordelia lived, so he couldn't go visit her. When she
it's very
back.
possible that could have happened.
Willow mentions that, it'd be great if Buffy would just show up at school. So apparently that's just how they expect to meet up with anybody, is that they're just going to randomly show up at school.
Well, and Xander mentions at this part that she was kicked out. Yeah. She can't show back up, which kind of goes to the, that, they have interacted and stuff because they've apparently found out from somebody that she was expelled. Mm-hmm. Which I assume would be Giles.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then, after Willow says, "I just wish we knew where she was," we cut to a beach, and Buffy is on the coast, and arms wrap around her, and it's revealed that it's Angel.
In the sunshine.
Yeah. Nice sunset in the background as she asks him to stay with her. He says, "Forever, I'll never leave, not even if you kill me." Nice.
Yeah. Yep. So she wakes up, kind of a gasp, and we see her now laying in bed. She kind of stares out the window to not the best part of a city. Mm-hmm. In the script book, let me see if I can find it. It's really... When she looks out the window, we should see the city, every city, sort of the city that is your worst nightmare of where your kid might run away to.
Mm. I mean, it kind of just looks like a mostly empty intersection to me, but I get it. They do some cool stuff with some of the imagery that they bring into the feeling of desperation, of living on the streets, of not knowing, where you're going to sleep that night or where your next meal is going to be. This establishing shot is just kind of like the start of that. They're going to do a lot more of that later on in the episode. But yeah,
Yeah.
Buffy is definitely in not the nicest looking of areas. And we go to the credits, which are slightly altered from what we've had. Not only is obviously Seth Green added to it, but there's a new mix to the song. And we have our, iconic traditional Buffy logo finally in the credits.
And then we come back to the show and we see a waitress in a little diner wearing a pink uniform, and we realize that Buffy is a waitress, and she is giving an order to some men who are very inappropriate with her.
Yeah.
And one of them, when she goes to walk off, slaps her on the bottom, and you can see she kind of stops and starts to turn around. Oh, like, is that the Slayer? And then she just nope, and walks off, which had to be really hard for Buffy.
Yeah. When you've seen her interact with people of that sort in the past, I go back to Go Fish and how originally, I think in the script, he was supposed to have grabbed her or something. And then in the episode, he doesn't get the chance. He just starts to reach for her and she takes control.
Yeah.
To this, where she gets slapped and harassed and just basically is forcing herself to just stomach it and move on. So that's I like it as a nice way of showing where Buffy is exactly right now. I don't particularly like the the guys. They're kind of the worst, but
yeah,
it does juxtapose nicely with some of the stuff that we've seen from Buffy in the previous season. But yes, she goes to a young couple who are so very in love.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. They pull out a bunch of pocket change and ask what they could get with that, because they have recently blown all their money on matching couples tattoos, which are just the ugliest tattoos.
Yeah, they're not the greatest. They're basically a heart. When you put them together, they make a heart, and their names are on each other's arms in the heart. So their names are Ricky and Lily, and so Ricky is on Lily's arm, and Lily is on Ricky's arm.
Yeah. What is interesting is Lily, who we'll get into a lot in this episode, but Lily, we know, is not her actual name and is not a name that she is probably going to stick with.
And we're supposed to know her.
Yeah. It's not a name that she's probably going to stick with anyway. So it's kind of interesting that, this idea of permanence that they've done of him tattooing her name on her and all that stuff is also kind of undercut by the fact that that's not her actual name. But it is revealed that it is a name that he chose for her. So, what we'll get into with names and identity in this episode, even though, this is kind of just something that they can use to explain how Buffy can identify older Ricky later, because he has the same tattoo. I really like the way that these tattoos kind of have an extra layer of talking about the idea of identity and forever and that permanence. The Lily, Ricky, and then Buffy Angel parallels are driven home very strongly in this episode. When Buffy says that the tattoos are nice and permanent, Ricky replies, forever, that's the whole point, which is word for word what Angel said in her dream, and Buffy even kind of pauses on that moment. So yeah, there's just a lot of parallels between those two couples. Yeah.
They order a piece of pie, and then Lily looks at Buffy and says, "Hey, do I know you?" And Buffy's like, "No, I'm trying to be someone else here." She doesn't say that, but
Yeah.
And Lily's like, "Really? Where are you from?" And Buffy says, "I'm going to go get your food." And then she goes up to the other waitress and asks the other waitress to cover for her, and she leaves. Which I'm assuming she's worked there for a while and has been a good waitress, because the other lady's just like, "Sure."
Mm-hmm.
So they have some kind of relationship. She's formed a relationship with the other waitress.
Yeah.
Even if it's just a good work ethic relationship.
just enough to like have cover for each other kind of built into their relationship. Yeah. I mean, here we see as soon as Lily starts to question about Buffy and her past and all of that, Buffy hightails it out of there. So she is still very much in the running phase of dealing with her past. So from there, we cut to the library, being the most busy we have ever seen the library.
Yes. Very, very busy. Lots of kids in there for some reason. And the very first scene is Giles and Willow walking, and they go up to the counter for Giles to check her books out. I thought it was really interesting in the script book right before this scene. The instructions are for the next 5 pages, scenes 5 through 7. I want them all to be done in one shot, moving from the library to the cafeteria and capturing all the craziness of the first day of school.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, the camera basically followed them as they did this. There was no editing on the next 3 scenes.
Yeah.
Which I paid real close attention to when I was watching it this time because I read that and I thought it was interesting.
Yes.
But, like, you could see how they did it when you know that as you're watching it.
Mm-hmm. A oneer is the technical term for it. And
I did not know that.
Joss Whedon is known to love his oneers. And yeah, it's where you take a extended scene, especially if you have something that has a lot of movement, and do it in one shot. And this really works for me. This whole like first day crazy, activity everywhere really works, especially juxtaposed when we cut away from it. But yeah, the energy that you feel on this first day of school, and there's a couple of tidbits that you kind of establish right after Willow is informed by Giles that he would in fact be amiss if something were to happen to her.
Yeah.
She runs into Cordelia. Cordelia's nervous about seeing Xander again, and she again like complains about her summer vacation, which I'm pretty sure she did in the season opener for season 2 as well. I think that's just she always complains about her summer vacations, which are way nicer than anybody else in Sunnydale is experiencing.
Yeah. Apparently she was forced to go to a resort where they had scheduled fun.
But yeah, then Oz comes up. He visits with books, and Willow's confused, and then he tries to explain that, remember when I didn't graduate, and then proceeded to not go to summer school.
Yeah. And the conversation that ensues between Oz and Willow is the most adorable thing ever. Although we'll point out during this scene where they go, like, all the conversations and stuff, everyone, including Willow, is dressed for summer. Or no, everyone, including Willow, is dressed for winter, as Cordelia is, in fact, dressed for summer.
Yep.
I guess they had to have Cordelia do that since Buffy wasn't in the scene. But yeah, Willow is trying very hard to accept the fact that her boyfriend is repeating a grade.
Mm-hmm.
And Oz is attempting to make Willow think that it is, what's the first thing he uses?
Cute.
He's
like, he was hoping that she would find the situation cute.
Yes,
and then they have this whole back and forth. It's so great.
Yeah, he moves on to maybe eccentric. Can I get an option on cool? It's just hilarious. I love it. It's very them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Xander runs in at one point and talks about being psyched to see Cordelia, and then leaves after making it awkward.
Yeah, very awkward. Kind of sleazy a little bit.
Larry's there talking about how they're going to have the best football season ever as long as they're focused and are disciplined and they don't have quite as many mysterious deaths, which I made sure to note. I was just like, I like that he's realistic and he says not quite as many deaths.
Yeah, like he knows there's going to be some. Like you can't keep all of them
Yeah,
from happening.
you can't avoid it. But if they just have a few less, then it's going to be their best football season.
Yeah. And then we have the scene where Xander and Cordelia see each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it is completely awkward and cringy. Just like, wow.
Yeah.
They are awkward and don't know what to say to each other and are just like, hello, hello. And then are just kind of like, okay, bye. And they both walk away unhappy with the conversation and what happened.
Yes. And intercut throughout all of this, like there's tons of background actors shuffling along. There's kids running in the hallway and teachers yelling at the students and like just constant motion and constant movement. And then there's this super hard cut to Buffy sitting alone in her tiny apartment holding a can of SpaghettiOs, which has got to be like the saddest meal.
Yeah. With this random can opener in one hand. Mm-hmm. Just like, you get the impression she's fixing to eat this out with a fork out of the can.
Yeah. Well, and it's also like, I love the idea that she's just going through this like daily routine that's so tedious and mundane and just, you know, the idea of survival without really anything to live for. And that she goes to make her meager dinner and gets sidetracked halfway through opening up the can and just sits and stares off in space. And I mean, like, this one shot does more to say about Buffy's current state of mind and her situation than any of the previous stuff we've gotten in this episode so far. Like, this is juxtaposed with that crazy energy of the first day of school and the vibrance of it, right? You know, that California sunshine and the exuberance of all of those kids, and then cut to this dark room with Buffy just staring off into space, holding a can of spaghetti. And I cannot get past the can of SpaghettiOs.
It's just what makes it so sad.
It's just the symbol of everything that's wrong with this situation. From there's a little scene of Buffy walking in the street past Helen's kitchen, which I believe is the diner that she's working at. You know, again, another layer to the theme that they're playing with in this episode. So Helen's kitchen. There is a man handing out flyers and talking about,
hope.
Opportunities and hope to a man who's clearly down on his luck, sitting on the edge of the sidewalk. And
this man is very, very, very clearly some kind of creepy cult leader. And anyone should be able to realize that just looking at him. I'm just saying.
That's good casting. There's some good casting.
It was some good casting. They did not try to hide it.
And then we also get an elderly woman who, as Buffy passes, just repeats the phrase, "I'm no one."
Over and over, yeah.
Over and over. So next we have Giles on the phone in the library. He says thanks and hangs up and then runs out saying he has a lead. Fred in Oakland has a sketchy report of a young girl fending off a group of vampires. And that there's a flight in about an hour and he's going.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is.
Which we kind of get the impression. Yeah, we kind of get the impression that he's done this a lot.
Yeah.
Over the summer.
Well, and Xander himself says, what makes this different than the last 9 leads? And Giles says, well, I believe there's a meal on this flight. So silver lining.
Food.
Plain food, nonetheless. Yeah, this is kind of an interesting little back and forth where Xander gives a little bit of the, don't get your hopes up talk, which again echoes a lot of the theming of the episode, dealing with hope and all of that. But Willow's like, also don't give up. And then there's a moment where Xander kind of looks at Willow and changes his tune to match Willow to kind of help give Giles that little bit of hope. Like he kind of realizes that even though I think Xander is the one who's the most moved on, which is weird because of Xander's relationship with Buffy.
Right.
But in a lot of ways in this episode, he feels like the one who he uses the past tense. He tells Giles not to get his hopes up.
And he feels like the more realistic one.
Yeah.
With his comment at the end of the scene, Willow says, you don't think he'll find her? And he says, I think he'll find her when she wants to be found.
Yeah.
Which is very true.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do any of us think that he would find Buffy if she didn't want to be found?
I don't know. Like, I feel like the Giles hope stuff didn't click in until this viewing, and how that echoes the idea of Ken and his hope stuff and all of this other stuff. Is like, Giles.
Well, I didn't connect those two until just now.
Yeah.
So
Giles,
you're one up on me.
Well, Giles is in an interesting position, right? Because, quote unquote, there to be the watcher for Buffy, but there's no Buffy to watch. I mean, he doesn't really have a purpose right now. I mean, sure, he's the Sunnydale librarian, but that's a cover. That's not something that is his calling. Well, so it's interesting. This is the first kind of sign of aimless Giles, which we'll get a lot of aimless Giles going forward. But this is where he's just so much of his energy and so much of his resources are spent trying to find Buffy, so that he can also continue to fulfill his calling, and be her watcher again. But also because he cares, because he's like watcher dad.
Yes.
But yeah, I do think that Xander kind of has the most realistic perspective here. And it's interesting, like, how did he get to this point? And I'll be really interested to watch next week's episode when they kind of all blow up at each other, and watch Xander, particularly in that episode, after watching this episode so fresh and really digging into where everybody is feeling wise with Buffy. So, from there, we have Buffy walking down the street at night. There's a prostitute yelling in the background, and Lily walks up, repeatedly calling for Anne, and then changes it to Buffy, and Buffy stops.
Yeah, which I don't remember that episode, them actually meeting each other. Like, Lily learning her name. But I guess she did, or overheard it or something.
Yeah, well, and I'm trying to remember. I know they had, like, a little bit of interaction, but I'm not sure if it was enough. But obviously, there was the whole scheme to use Buffy as a bartering chip, and she was somewhat aware of that. So she may have
gotcha.
known,
That's true.
Buffy's name before even meeting Buffy.
Good, very good point. So she basically says, "Don't be mad. I'm not going to say anything, but I guess you don't remember me." And Buffy, like, remembers her from the diner, so it's like, Lily? Mm-hmm. And is like, "No, I was in your town and was part of a cult that worshipped vampires, and you saved my life."
Yeah.
Because, that's what you say to people. So Buffy's now like, "Did you tell anyone where I was or who I was?" Which is kind of weird because, like, they don't know anybody in common.
Mm-hmm.
But,
yeah. Buffy is so concerned about getting found that there's no logic to. Just somebody knowing her actual name is enough to cause her to go into panic mode. And it is interesting that at the beginning you have Lily just repeating Anne over and over again, like, clearly to where Buffy should be able to hear it. And it's not until, like, she hears Buffy that she stops and has her, like, panic moment of just like, oh God, that's my name.
yeah.
So she's not really identifying as Anne, but she's so anti the idea of identifying as Buffy that it causes her to have that moment of panic when she hears her name actually said out loud there. You could almost say that Buffy is no one.
You really could.
You really could.
So they kind of start talking about what's going on with each other and, well, what's going on with Lily. Buffy doesn't really share any information. And Lily talks about Ricky and how he takes care of her. Then ends up saying that she kind of every so often just becomes a different person and changes her name, which is really interesting because the three people that we find out that she is are very different from each other. She's like a homeless teen on the street named Lily, a member of a vampire worshipping cult named, what was it, Chanterelle?
Chanterelle, yeah.
Chanterelle, and a hippie named Sister Sunshine. They're all very different people. But then Lily kind of asks Buffy, "You got some money? I know a rave we can go to." And Buffy says, she doesn't want to go, and starts to give Lily money when an old man just pushes through between them and walks away. And Lily looks at him and says, "That's not very polite." And he says, "I'm no one." Oh, so now we know something's up because we got a second elderly person saying this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a coincidence. So, now we know something's going on.
Yes.
He then walks into the road where he is almost hit by a car. And I think he was trying to kill himself.
Yeah, it's very quickly cut, but it does show him turn to face the car.
Yeah.
So, yes. Buffy instincts take over and she pushes him out of the way and gets hit herself. And of course,
but she's Buffy, so she hops up.
There's like a dramatic cut to commercial, and you come back. It's like, it's Buffy. What do you expect? But she gets up and runs away as the people are trying to help her. And yeah, she runs into. I called him Flyer Guy before I figured out his name was Ken. So some of my notes say Flyer Guy, and that just amuses me. But she runs into Flyer Guy and knocks his flyers all over the place. They're all over the street now. And she stops to help him pick them up.
Which is very polite.
I mean, she was just hit by a car.
Right. Yep. So she helps pick those up. And he starts giving her his little cult spiel about the family home she can come to for a hot meal or to take a shower or to find hope.
Yes.
And it's so after school specially. It's just like so after school specially. And like Ken literally looks like every bad guy in every after school special.
Oh, well. And then he has the line.
Don't be shy about stopping by. I guess you're not starving, but we're not just interested in feeding the body. You might find something you're missing.
That's like the creepiest way you could phrase that, of this just yeah, by the way, rerun a super cult and come on down, kids.
Which, I mean, apparently works because they got lots of kids coming in.
Apparently, yeah.
Although I assume most of them go for something to eat.
So he has this line where he asks Buffy why she's here and says that this is not a place for a kid. You get old fast here. Despair drains the life out of you. And he says that this kind of ends up being the last place, like the last stop for a lot of kids. And it shouldn't have to be that way. And this is where we have some of the intercut, people on the streets, including a shot that is very iconic from the opening credits of Angel later on that they reuse for that.
Oh yeah.
But I'm gonna play with this idea of using the word kid specifically, because there's a couple of different times that it's used. But this was the first time that I really kind of noted that this is not a place for a kid, and it's Ken addressing Buffy as if Buffy is a kid. We'll get into that, because we've had lots of discussion about Buffy and maturity and not being coded as a kid, even though she is technically a teenager in high school. She is much more mature than what her actual age would reflect. But here we have Ken calling her a kid. And I thought that was noteworthy. But yeah, we have all of this very sad intercut stuff with people living on the street begging for money. And then it cuts to the Bronze, and we have Belly Love performing Back to Freedom, which is a very on-the-nose song for this episode, if you have a chance to listen to the lyrics. Very much about trying to, like, get over yourself and get back to your actual self and not the version of yourself that you've been hiding behind.
Before we go to the scene in the Bronze, the scene after Buffy has a conversation with Ken, where it's the little montage of kids on the street and kids doing drugs and stuff like that. How did you feel about that scene with all the images? Because it seemed out of place to me. It kind of seemed performative.
Yeah.
Because, like, I mean, I know it's a show, but still. Like, they were getting their point across already, and it just seems like it kind of, like, just shoved it at you.
Yeah, and I think the issue is that this episode, and we'll get into it, especially towards the end, with the factory setting and the commentary on communism and all of that. This episode has, like, a very, like, political messaging, one of the more politically charged episodes of Buffy that we've seen. And, like, sometimes there's stuff in there, I think, just to drive that message that don't really make sense with Buffy's story, right? And the thing about Buffy, and the thing that in a lot of ways makes Buffy as timeless as it is it doesn't worry about things like current events or making specific commentaries to that time period. It's more about Buffy specifically and her story and her arc. And so it kind of becomes timeless in a lot of ways. The commentary that they were going for here, in ways I like that they have some of this intermixed in it, but it doesn't really feel like what we traditionally see from Buffy. And we'll visit this again when we get to Pangs in season 4. Like, when Buffy tries to, like, have some political commentary intermixed with their episode, it doesn't always land the best.
Yeah.
So I think that they were trying to go for driving some of this message about, like, not only communism, but also, like, this idea of people who are vulnerable being taken advantage of, and the way that our society is built to favor those who are already well off. I mean, and even on a smaller scale, you have stuff like Cordelia complaining about how she had to go to a resort where she had to have organized fun, in the same episode where you have people literally begging for loose change on the streets, and squatting in abandoned buildings. So it's not always arranged in the best way, I don't think, but I can see your point. Like, it's kind of, it's one of the least subtle montages that they've done, and kind of feels like it's hitting you over the head with a hammer and sickle. But yeah, it's I don't really care for that particular montage, other than the fact that I like some of the ideas that went into this episode. But again, I feel like this isn't the place for those discussions in a lot of ways, because the idea is Buffy a lot of times takes mundane issues and puts a very, like, fantastical thing over it. And so it's things like, up until this point, we've been dealing with issues of, like, you know, typical middle-class high school issues, right? Not, like, big societal issues.
Right. And it just kind of comes out of nowhere. which I don't mind shows that do that deal with issues.
Yeah.
One of my favorite shows is Grey's Anatomy, and they deal with the social political issue pretty much every episode.
Yeah.
But Buffy had never done it, and then kind of halfway did it. And it's a show about, supernatural stuff. So it just feels off.
Yeah. Well, I think like it could have worked if this was the show that they were designing from the beginning and took some time to polish this particular type of storytelling. But this is mostly a show about high school as hell. And there's still some things that draw back to high school as hell in this episode, but it's really much bigger. And I would say this is one of our first tastes of Buffy the adult years. Because Buffy, even though they keep using those words, like, the phrases of kids, these are kids on the street, these feel like, adults, young adults who are out on their own for the first time. This really feels more like young 20-somethings. This feels like like late teens, young 20-somethings, like rent-aged kids.
Yes.
Not like 16 and 17-year-olds.
Yes.
I feel like the issues that are explored in this episode are kind of more akin to what we see in later Buffy, as far as like more adult issues and not just the high school stuff that we've dealt with.
Yeah. Well, really the only season we see that in is season 6, where she has to deal with like adult life issues.
Yeah.
Because season 7 is so focused on the big bad of that season that we don't really see any of that focusing on life stuff.
Yeah. But this is like the hard life stuff of just like, where am I going to get my next meal? The stuff that realistically we have the resources, that no one should feel this way. And then there's this whole layer of commentary on how people are taken advantage of when they're in this state, when they're so desperate, that someone like Ken could sweep in and just take advantage of people. And, I think the shot that is most on the nose, like really drives home one of the messagings that this episode is going for in this montage, is the kid who's like begging for money from the well-dressed businessman. But
okay, so the bronze.
The bronze! Xander and Willow are there being somber. Xander's like, boy, I'm glad we showed up for depressing night.
Yeah.
And Willow says she wonders what she is doing right now. And Xander just goes on this rant about Cordelia. And how she's probably laughing about him to her friends about having some kind of affair with Pedro the Cabana boy.
But I mean, in this episode, does Xander and Cordelia's relationship not seem like the like 5th grade relationship you had?
It's so weird.
Where you were boyfriend and girlfriend, but you never actually talked to each other. You just discussed that person with your friends.
Mm-hmm.
And stuff, because like these are seniors in high school. Like, why are they not just talking to each other? It's so weird.
Yeah, it's like they only see each other at school.
I mean, I don't know if they're trying to like show us how immature Xander and Cordelia are, or I don't know.
I don't know either.
It doesn't make sense because they have everyone else has like grown up a bunch, and then they have this middle school relationship thing going. It just it doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
especially with Cordelia, because you would think Cordelia would just be like, hey boyfriend, come or something,
Yeah, the Xander and Cordelia stuff doesn't really make sense for either character. But like we just watched Becoming Part 2, and saw how much those two had come together. Like, that little moment where she enters the hospital room and they just embrace each other. Like, you can actually feel genuine love between those two at that point. And they've been through stuff together that, even if for some reason they had no communication over the summer, this should not be like their first thoughts when seeing each other again. And especially when we get into this whole conversation where Xander's just like, we could just offer Cordelia up as bait in order to fight this vampire.
Which they do that with the people in the group a lot. So I don't really see that as like a serious thing.
Well, I see it as context is everything, right? It'd be one thing if, like, as a group, they were together discussing this vampire and how they need to come up with a plan, and, like, Xander saying, well, we need someone as bait, and then, like, Cordelia seems like whatever. Like, context is everything. But, like, here, after complaining about Cordelia and talking about her in such a negative light, he immediately goes to, let's use her as bait. And it'll get worse later on too. But we're not there yet. So this next scene I have feelings about.
Okay.
I've mentioned this a couple of times, so we'll get right into it. Joyce is at the house paying bills, and there's a knock at the door, and you have this little moment where she kind of looks like she's hopeful, and she opens the door, and it's Giles, and she kind of has that realization again. And Giles and Joyce have apparently connected over the summer enough to where Giles is fully aware that Joyce knows about Buffy, and Joyce is fully aware of Giles's, or at least mostly aware of Giles's relationship with Buffy and how he was involved in.
Yeah, which
Buffy's
is like
thing.
a really good point, because I kind of wonder how that came about.
Yeah. And this actually shows that these characters continue to develop over the summer. And we'll never really know how these two connected or how this happened, but something happened to where they kind of have this relationship that's surrounding finding Buffy and figuring out what's happened to Buffy. And Giles, like, comes back with information about this lead that, turns out that not only was it not Buffy, but it was also not vampires. There was a bunch of school kids in heavy mascara listening to extremely silly music.
I love that line. It's so funny.
Yeah, it's all very kind of, kosher and genuine at first, where Joyce is like, thank you for going, and that she can't leave the house. She's afraid Buffy will call and need her. And this is another note where Giles says Buffy is the most capable child I've ever known. So there's another framing Buffy as a kid. We had it from Ken earlier, and now we have it from Giles here. But he said that he honestly believes that she's in no danger. And they just have kind of this back and forth where Joyce is like, the last time we saw each other, we fought. And Giles says, you mustn't blame yourself. And then the bomb is dropped.
Yeah.
I don't. I blame you. You've been this huge influence on her, guiding her. You had this whole relationship with her behind my back. I feel like you've taken her away from me.
And gotta say, totally get Joyce's point of view here.
You do.
I do. All the times. Now, we've talked about ignorant Joyce and the weirdness that is Joyce's random acceptance of Giles and Buffy's relationship, where she's just like, yeah, whatever, Sure, he'll come and visit me at the hospital, or sure, he'll be there when Buffy's fainted and hospitalized herself. Like, obviously.
Yeah.
But the truth is, what she says is not wrong. Giles had this whole relationship with her daughter that involved her daughter doing incredibly dangerous, life-threatening things. And
True.
yeah, like, if I was in Joyce's point of view, I would be so mad at Giles for that. Because here we have, in this situation, again, Giles calling Buffy a child. And if anybody gets the right to call Buffy a child, it's her own mama. Her own mama gets to forever see Buffy as a kid, as someone that she is there to protect. And to know that not only was all of this happening behind her back, but that this adult man, had this influence over her daughter to the point where Buffy put her life at risk. Yeah, I would totally blame Giles.
My feelings about this scene are weird because, like, this happens and she says this, but then it is never brought up or talked about ever again.
Yeah.
It's just completely dropped.
And this falls into the Joyce being super inconsistent category, because she has a similar thing with Angel later this season, where she just goes and drops a truth bomb on Angel. And, like, I wish that they would have done more with this kind of stuff. Ultimately, I like the idea of this scene, and I do, in a lot of ways, side with Joyce in her feelings. But it's not a great delivery. And there's also just a certain amount of servicing the theme of the episode that's here, that tends to overshadow the, like, emotional weight of what these characters are actually feeling. Like, there's a certain amount of stuff in here that's just to support the theme of the episode. But, like, this scene should just be about Joyce and Giles and this weird co-parenting relationship that they had that Joyce wasn't
didn't even know
aware
about.
of. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like...
And then, honestly, Joyce is probably feeling a lot of guilt that she didn't notice that it was weird that the school librarian was, like, friends with her teenage daughter.
Oh, yeah. Like, I imagine, and it's kind of presented as such, but I imagine a lot of what Joyce has been doing this summer is playing back the past couple of years and really thinking hard about everything that's happened to Buffy that she's kind of had those blinders for.
Yeah, wouldn't that be so cool to hear to be in those thoughts? Mm-hmm. Like, when she realizes what was happening at the parent-teacher night at school.
Yeah.
Or when Buffy burned down the gym at her old school and all that. I would love to, like, hear those thoughts.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we got a lot of episode left.
Yeah.
We go to the cafe. Lily rushes up to talk to Buffy, shouting about how Ricky is gone, and Buffy's just like, we'll call the police, and Lily's just, well, no, he skipped out on his parole, and she asks Buffy for help. Buffy is still very much in denial. She says she can't. And then Lily has, I love this delivery of, but that's who you are and stuff.
Yeah, you help people. And yeah, Buffy's like, but I don't want to be that person anymore. Why won't y'all leave me alone? Buffy basically tells Lily, I'll meet you when I get off work, and, I'll kind of help you see if we can find what happened to Ricky. Mm-hmm. Then they're at a blood bank, and Lily's explaining that they give give blood because they get paid, and also cookies.
Yes, mostly cookies.
Yeah, mostly the cookies. Oh, yeah. They are talking to the Nurse Joan, which she very much reminds me of the school nurse in Go Fish.
Yeah.
Like, the casting people for Buffy have a very specific idea of what they think nurses look like.
Yeah. So
they ask her, hey, have you seen Ricky? Has he been here lately? Joan's gonna look it up. And she says, no, he hasn't been here. Buffy says that they should split up to look for Ricky. And Lily's like, can I come with you? Anyway,
I love
they
her
decide,
so much.
yeah. We see Buffy looking around. We see her in her old abandoned building. And like she walks through a wall that has a giant hole in it. She sees other people, other homeless people like crashing there and sleeping there and stuff. And then she sees the old man that got hit by a car, or well, that she saved from getting hit by a car. And there's an open bottle of drain cleaner beside him. Because, he didn't get hit by a car, but he was going to kill himself.
So is it confirmed in the script that it's the same man? Because I couldn't like be bothered to like compare the scenes, but I had the assumption.
It is.
Okay.
It is confirmed it's the same man.
Okay.
She picks up his wrist like she's going to take his pulse for some reason. And then sees the tattoo, half a heart with the word Lily inside it. And she's like, why does this stuff keep finding me? Contemplate the idea that you want to end your life so much that you will drink drain cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
That is not an easy death.
No.
That's painful. Buffy goes back to the apartment and tells Lily that, Ricky is dead, and explains that something weird's going on because, well, he's old.
Mm-hmm.
And Lily doesn't believe her and gets upset and asks, is it because of you? Is this stuff happening because of you? Did you bring it? And Buffy finally loses her patience, is like, I didn't ask for this. Leave me alone. I don't want to deal with your problems. And Lily jumps up and leaves the apartment.
Yes.
Now, in the episode, you get the impression that Lily's mad. Like, she's mad at the way Buffy's talking to her and everything. At least that's what I get.
Okay.
And she leaves.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the impression? Like, she's mad? They're fighting. She gets angry and she storms out.
I mean, I definitely read it as like upset in general, but part of her is definitely upset towards Buffy and not just upset about Ricky.
Yeah. Well, in the script book, it is described as she gets up because she cannot deal with what is happening and has to get away.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's upset, can't face reality.
Yeah.
Which is not the impression I get when I watch the episode. When I watch the episode, like, they're arguing, and I think she storms out angry. She's mad. She's like, this is your fault.
Yeah.
I'm leaving. I don't want anything to do with you.
I feel like that's one of those notes that works in a script that would be really hard to convey as an actor. I think you can kind of pull into that idea a little bit in the next scene, and why she's so easily swayed by Ken is that part of her is in that denial in that not dealing phase of,
and just looking for someone to take care of her again.
Yeah. And
which is what she's always looking for.
Yeah. And that's what she talks about here is like, but he takes care of me. Again, we have some interesting parallels going on. This is probably the most intense scene that shows Buffy's denial, because in this very scene she says, these things happen all the time. You can't just close your eyes and hope that they are going to go away, which is
what she does.
What she has been doing for the past several months. She is very much Lily in this situation. Lily, although you can't compare this relationship because obviously Lily and Ricky, as devoted as they were in getting those tattoos, are not the Buffy Angel romance.
No, not at all.
But it's interesting because obviously there's a direct parallel between Lily and Buffy, and Lily adopts Buffy's fake identity at the end of it. Like, she's very much becomes that made up character.
And keeps it for a really long time.
Keeps it for a really long time. And does way more with it than Buffy was going to.
Yes.
But it's interesting because Lily is here and she is so small. Like, she's so meek and I just need someone to take care of me. And so she's so vulnerable. Buffy, I think, has tried to adopt this idea of abandoning the Slayer entirely and just becoming so removed. Yeah, so removed from that she presents herself as vulnerable, and that's why we have that scene earlier on where she just accepts the slap that she gets and continues to move on, even though her first impulse is to strike back. And so, like, Lily is, in a lot of ways, what Buffy is trying to become, or what Buffy could possibly become if she just gives up entirely. But Buffy is so, at her core, capable, so not vulnerable, that she never gets even close. And Lily here is talking about, like, Ricky takes care of me and just wants someone to take care of me, and all of this stuff that kind of directs her for a lot of this episode. Buffy is very much so harshly independent that she's not really looking for someone to take care of her. She's looking to not exist. And there's never a situation in the Buffy-Angel relationship where Angel took care of Buffy. I mean, not truly. They had a much more mutual dependency where they took care of each other, but a lot of times Buffy was more of a caregiver to Angel than Angel was to Buffy.
Yes.
So, like, there's definitely parallels in the relationship, but it's kind of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer is the strongest, most empowered version, and then Lily is the weakest version, and Anne is kind of somewhere in the middle. And so when Buffy returns to being the Slayer and is able to bring herself back up to that pinnacle, she opens up this door for Lily to become Anne and becomes more in the middle, and then does some fantastic things with that empowerment that she receives and becomes a caretaker herself.
Yeah, I can see that.
But right now she's still very much Lily, very much just looking for anything. And this is the moment where I could see, like, she's the most in denial, because Flyer Man, I'm still referring to him as Flyer Man at this point, hears her say Ricky's name, and it's just like, oh yeah, he's with us at the family home, and someone sold you a tall tale about him being dead, and just like, they just go back, like she just follows along, again, just desperate to have someone take care of her.
Yeah,
poor Lily. So I kind of glossed over this bit, but there's a section in the scene between Lily and Buffy where Buffy talks about how he aged rapidly, and then, like, jumps to the idea that maybe it was something in his blood.
Yeah. Because she, like, goes back to the blood bank.
Yeah.
To look through the records.
Is one of those random leaps that I guess technically still gets her where she's supposed to go, but isn't the correct random leap exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, she breaks into the blood bank to go through their private files, and is very blunt about it as the nurse approaches and asks what she's doing. And she notices that several of the patients, including Ricky, are listed as candidates, and confronts the nurse about it. The nurse plays the "I'll call the police," and Buffy just rips the phone off the wall.
Yeah, doesn't even miss a beat or turn around or anything. And it is so awesome. It is so great.
And so here I think this is Buffy acting independently. She's already kind of burned that bridge with Lily, and Buffy's still on the case. She's still working towards trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And what's interesting here is that she has this lovely rant, which I'll just insert the sound clip because I enjoy it.
I don't want any trouble. I just want to be alone and quiet in a room with a chair and a fireplace and a tea cozy. I don't even know what a tea cozy is, but I want one. Instead, I keep getting trouble, which I am more than willing to share.
She asks, "What are you doing with these kids?" And so we've had a couple of references of Buffy being a kid. But this is a time where Buffy references the others as being
As kids. Yeah.
And this is when we start to see Buffy. Obviously, there's the big moment later on, but this is where we start to see Buffy become Buffy again. You know, she's still in the, I still want to be that person that's just hiding away, that nobody knows, you know, her destiny or her responsibilities or anything like that. That's just that person that is ignored. Like, I still want that. But I think she is starting to realize that even though that's something that she wants, that's not who she is. And, you know, here you have Buffy acting independently, talking to this nurse after Lily's walked out on her. And Buffy was very aggressive towards Lily in that scene about, you know, you just have to accept this and move on because sometimes bad stuff just happens, kind of attitude in that scene. And so for her to still go off of that hunch of maybe there was something in his blood and decide to continue to investigate shows that as much as she may want to deny that part of herself, she's still pulled in that direction. The nurse explains that she's been giving him the names of the healthy ones, which, ugh.
Yeah, that's creepy.
And Buffy asks who, and we cut back to Flyer Man, who has prepared Lily for the cleansing, which isn't exactly like a baptism.
Yeah, but even more to go on the you are walking and joining a cult on purpose. He puts her in a white burlap sack dress to wear.
Like, this is bad news bears, Lily. You poor sweet innocent child. Yeah, like, and this is full on denial from Lily. Like, she's just like, and after I'll get to see Ricky? Like, she's
like, how can you
so,
even? Yeah.
She's so unaccepting of what is right in front of her face. So yeah, like, she's almost like a caricature of what Buffy's trying to be.
Yeah. Yeah, they're very much the extremes.
Okay, so we cut back to the group patrolling and Cordy complaining about being bait, which is fair.
Yeah, definitely fair. They kind of get in a fight over where they're supposed to be. And while they do, the vampire sneaks up on Willow.
Yeah, in here is the line that I was mentioning earlier when Xander starts to get really bad. But yeah, like, Xander goes to hide and Cordelia follows and he's just like, no, this is my hiding spot. And Cordy's like, well, where should I hide? And he's like, you're the bait. And as they continue to argue, Xander even says that they will rejoice over Cordelia's death.
Yeah. Ouch.
Yeah. So I've mentioned it before, and I'll probably mention it again, but as much as I enjoy Xander and Cordelia for the amusement side of things, I will continue to sarcastically say they are definitely made for each other.
Yeah.
Like, I don't dislike the ship because at least it's self-aware enough at times, but there's also, like, times where it's just like, how are these two still together? So yeah, as the vampire is approaching Willow from behind, we cut back to Ken and Lily at what is most certainly a portal to another dimension. I mean...
Oh, yeah. 100%. But apparently Lily thinks it's where you get baptized. And reaches in to touch it for some unknown reason.
Buffy shows up at the family house and talks about how she woke up and was like, "What's with all the sin?"
Yeah.
I'll just insert the clip from here.
Yeah.
You know, I woke up and I looked in the mirror and I thought, hey, what's with all the sin? I need to change. I'm dirty. I'm bad with the sex and the envy and that loud music us kids listen to nowadays. But I just suck at undercover. Where's Ken?
So as Lily is reaching into the pool, Buffy enters, and just like it's very blunt and just kind of like calls Ken out and asks how he makes them old, and Lily's just there like, "What's going on?"
Yeah.
But yeah, she is pulled through the obvious portal. And Buffy immediately goes after her, and Ken is dragged along with when he tries to stop her. And they all fall through. Buffy checks on Lily, and Ken just says, "Ow, my face."
And shows them a demon face. And he's very mad because it takes a long time to glue on his human face. And I just have to say, if you're going to glue on a human face as your disguise, maybe it shouldn't look exactly like the stereotypical bad guy in every teen movie ever.
Well, to be fair though, you gotta give him props because that prosthetic is legit. He looks so good. He looks so much like a human.
Yeah.
So he calls for the guards. Buffy and Lily run, and they discover that they are actually in this giant enslavement factory.
That is the perfect way to describe that. Enslavement factory.
Yep. Okay. Ken walks in behind them as they're kind of frozen, taking it all in, and says, "Welcome to my world. I hope you like it." And my cat just charged through the room.
Yeah.
In the most graceful fashion. Ken says all of that. And then he knocks Buffy out.
Yes.
Xander and Cordelia are still arguing.
Yeah, we're back in the graveyard, and Xander and Cordelia are still arguing and fighting with each other. And then we all of a sudden hear Willow yelling for help, and they take off toward her, but Oz beats them there. And they struggle with the vampire and fight, and Cordelia kind of accidentally pushes the vampire onto Xander, and Xander kind of accidentally stakes him. It's all accident.
Yeah.
And there's this moment where Xander's laying on the ground with the vampire on top of him and Cordelia on top of the vampire, and then the vampire turns into dust and disappears, and Cordelia falls on top of Xander, and it's not a romantic moment at all because a vampire just turned to dust between them. But it's like you're supposed to think it is because it's got that music, and then they start kissing, and
Yeah.
But it's not. It's very creepy.
Those two are made for each other. No, I think it's a running joke of like how many times the Scoobies continue to act perfectly normal after having quite obviously just inhaled a like pint of vampire dust.
Yeah.
Like you're breathing that in. You're
on them, like all over their skin.
Yeah. They don't really talk much in the show about the gross aspect of having vampire dust all over you.
So they start making out in the graveyard. And then we are back to the underground factory in hell. Mm-hmm. And Buffy and Lily are in a cell, and Buffy kind of wakes up and starts talking to Lily, and Ken is there.
Mm-hmm.
He starts talking about how hell is the total absence of hope, and this is where you guys have been heading your whole lives. You come from nothing. You're going to become nothing. And Buffy tells Lily not to listen to him, but you can tell she's like listening and letting it affect her.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ken mentions Ricky and how he forgot her. It took a long time, but he forgot her. And explains that, you know, in the dimension they're in, time moves much faster. 100 years go by, and it's only one day on Earth.
Yeah. And this is another, like, obvious parallel to what we understand later is happening to Angel at this point. Because Angel is, in fact, in a hell dimension where time moves much faster. And in a lot of ways, forgets who he is, but still hangs on to Buffy, as we'll get into in an episode just a couple from now. Recognizes Buffy before he recognizes himself, that kind of idea. So again, we got those parallels being planted for stuff yet to come in the season. But yeah, like, I like the commentary on hope. Again, it's just one part of a lot of messaging that's in this episode. But I like the line of, what is hell other than the total absence of hope?
It's a very moving line.
Yeah. And it's, in a lot of ways, what the pattern that you've seen from Lily at this point. She kind of followed the loser pastor, right, when she was Miss Sunshine or whatever, because presumably he gave her some sort of hope. She became Chanterelle and worshipped vampires because the idea of being a vampire gave her some form of hope. And then she had this relationship with Ricky and had him take care of her, and that was like another sign of hope. And then even after Buffy tells her what she does, she continues to follow Ken and this idea of hope. So you can see that Lily's been beaten down again and again and again here. But then you also talked about it, like, this is affecting Buffy. Like, Buffy's chosen to walk away from all the things that could possibly give her hope. And it has kind of decided to be removed from hope. Whereas Lily's constantly pursuing hope, but continues to get taken advantage of. Whereas Buffy is pulling away from hope purposefully. Basically, Buffy's choosing to be in hell, whereas Lily's actually in hell.
Well, and Buffy feels like she should be, because she murdered Angel.
Yeah. Buffy's is a self-inflicted hell.
Because she believes she deserves it.
Yeah.
Then we cut to a scene where they're lined up with other teenagers, and a demon guard is walking by and is like, you work and you live, that's all. You are no one. You mean nothing. And he walks up to the first kid and is like, who are you? And the boy answers Aaron and gets hit with a club. And the demon asks the next person, who are you? And he says no one. And so now we know, you're supposed to say no one. And oh yeah, the old people walking around saying I'm no one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now these guards remind me so much of the demons in the Angel episode, the Scourge, the Nazi ones.
Mm.
It's the one where Doyle dies.
Okay.
The Nazi demons, they're called the Scourge. Like they sound like them, they look like them.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I can see, like, I'm having trouble picturing them exactly. It's been a while since I've watched that episode, but I feel like I can see that. You'll quickly discover when we get into Angel that I'm not nearly as versed in Angel as I am in Buffy.
Well, it's Why We Fight. It's like the 8th episode in the first season, I think. That could be wrong. I'm not 100% sure on that.
Okay.
But it is in the beginning of the first season.
Yeah.
They do that where the demon goes down the line asking, who are you? And all of them answer no one. And then he gets to Buffy and says, who are you? And she says,
I'm Buffy, the Vampire Slayer, and you are?
And he reaches up to swing the club, and Buffy basically breaks his arm before he can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And starts fighting with guards then she beats up the guards and it's like, everybody follow me. They kind of get caught where they can't get out, and she realizes she has to make a distraction. So she tells Lily to, take everybody out this way, and anybody who else wants to go can go, but don't stop for anyone. And Lily's like, I can do this. And Buffy's like, yeah, you can. I say so. I say you can. And so now Lily has confidence.
Yeah.
Buffy told her she could.
Isn't that the truth, though? If you have someone that you really look up to, and they say, you are capable of doing this, yeah, all right, I'm empowered now.
Yeah. I mean,
great.
It's very much
It's
very much makes sense.
it's such a quick little back and forth. I like that Lily goes back to try to apologize, and Buffy's like, this can wait. But yeah, this is a really empowering moment, and this is Buffy's kind of chosen to go back to full Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She calls it out, that's who I am, and is not only no longer rejecting the idea of hope, but is willing to become hope for others again, and is using that as a way to empower Lily, who we've talked about, who continually looks for hope in the wrong places or continues to get burned by everyone around her. And here's someone who she knows to be a beacon of good, right? Because you'd have that moment earlier where she goes to Buffy about Ricky, and it's just this is what you do. You help people. And then Buffy says, you can handle this because I say so. And yeah, it's just such a quick little exchange, but I love it so much.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Buffy runs as guards chase her. She takes one of them out with this sick spinning kick on this bar, and then jumps up on this platform where she continues taking them out. And she I couldn't keep count of how many demons she fought in this. There's so many.
Yeah, there's a lot.
As she fights, she picks up a hammer, and then she takes out another demon, snatching his sickle-like weapon. There's actually a name for this weapon, and I should know it, but I cannot remember it. But I've seen it in Buffy groups because it's a very well-liked weapon that people comment on a lot. But she has the, of course, the hammer and sickle, which we talked a little bit about the representation that has, and the political commentary that's kind of weaved through here. But then you have this awesome power shot where she's holding those two. Remains to be a lot of people's favorite Buffy opening credits power shot.
There is a scene here during the fight when she's fighting all the demons that I really, really like. Mm-hmm. It was cut out of the episode, but she's fighting and she looks up, and on a platform above her is one of the demons. And he looks down and then dives at her from above, roaring with anger like he's going to grab her. And Buffy looks at him, takes a step backwards, and the demon passes right by her and, lands with a thud on the ground. Mm-hmm. And she goes, demons, not that bright. Which I like. And I wish they had left it in because it's kind of funny. So
it also explains Ken's later actions.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Buffy is continuing to take out several demons just handily, just easily. And there's a little shot of Ken as he's watching her, and I just wrote Ken harumphs.
Harumphs?
He harumphs. He's like, rumph. And he runs off. The demons are starting to outnumber Buffy at this point. And then we cut away to see that Lily and the others are escaping. But oh no, Ken grabs Lily because reasons, which we'll get into in a second. And Buffy again takes out all the demons, even though she's outnumbered. And then she starts to run for it. And that's when Ken comes out with Lily, holding a blade to her neck, saying, if one of them fights, they all die. And then he proceeds to let Lily go.
So it's a line that historical bad guys have used as manipulation against decent people for pretty much forever.
Yeah, for any kind of act of uprising against power. And this was like back to that montage earlier that shows all the people down on their luck and stuff like that. Like it feels like the commentary of this particular storyline, that's the idea of this authoritative power literally draining the life out of people, like giving them a situation where they cannot escape and taking advantage of them in their weakened and vulnerable state. It's just, you get to it here, but earlier in the episode you're not really there yet, and so like just the weird flashes are kind of like, okay, where is this going? And like I'm not sure it connects the way it was supposed to. Like I feel like
I don't think it does.
Yeah, I think it's there in chunks, but the chunks don't really, gel the way that maybe they were envisioning they would. But yeah, Ken is here being very menacing as he lets Lily go and then proceeds to walk in front of Lily with his back to her.
Very smart.
Yeah,
Very smart.
I'll buy it just because of the idea of Ken believes himself to be someone who can read people, who can see them, and like everything about Lily says that she is in fact a no one, and would never rise up against him, except for the fact that she's gotten Buffy's influence here, which is a variable he was not prepared for. And even though he thinks he can read people, he reads Buffy inaccurately earlier when he talks to her about how he knows her. And he specifically uses Anne there, which I think is great. He knows who Anne is. He doesn't know who Buffy is. And he doesn't know Buffy's influence on Lily. And so he's willing to, just leave himself exposed because Lily couldn't possibly be someone who could rise up against him. And boy, was he wrong.
Oh, very, very wrong.
But yeah, he continues to lecture about the price of rebellion as Lily pushes him off the ledge where, I watched this with subtitles, and the subtitles literally read in parentheses, splat.
That's awesome.
I was very, very pleased with that.
Yeah.
And yeah, then there's this kind of confused pause, which Buffy uses to get away and then climb up to where Lily is. And they run where the others are kind of, being thwarted by a very heavy gate, which Buffy lifts for them, allowing them to be free. And she starts to slip under it when Ken rushes for her and manages to push her to the other side, causing the gate to fall ever so perfectly to pin both of his legs. This is definitely one of those situations kind of similar to the Xander Cordelia moment earlier where everything just lines up so perfectly.
Yeah. And he gets pinned under there, at which point she kind of grabs a club and bashes Kid in the head.
With like one of the weirdest Buffy, very witty,
Buffy
catchy phrases, which is funny because this episode talks about like Buffy's punning abilities at the beginning and how they took for granted Buffy's ability to just intimidate with her words, and then she has this line. So Buffy's not entirely back on her game yet.
No, she's definitely not. I find that line really weird. I don't know why it's in there. I wish it wasn't in there.
Everyone escapes. The portal conveniently seals behind them for reasons.
Yep. I mean, it's weird because you would think there's still demons in there.
Yeah.
But maybe Ken had control of it and it sealed because he was dead.
Yeah. It just was open long enough for everybody else to get out before it sealed.
Well, yeah.
Because reasons.
Because reasons.
The sealing of the portal means that all of those demons are trapped in the hell dimension, and there's no more worry about them coming and taking advantage of people. That would never happen.
No, because, next year they get out and Angel and Doyle fight them.
Yeah.
They might not look exactly like it. I didn't...
You didn't go and...
I didn't look it up
yeah.
to see, but they very strongly remind me of those demons. I told myself I was going to look it up, and then I never got around to
Yeah,
it.
it's kind of like me earlier. It's just like, I was going to compare those scenes and see if it was the same old guy, but then I was like, nah.
Well, I have your answer. It was the same old guy. I checked.
That worked. All right, so then we have this really sweet scene at the apartment where Buffy kind of explains that it's, paid up for the next 3 weeks, and that she's already talked to her boss about Lily starting at the diner, and she even talks about calling and checking up on her, which is she's kind of again trying to be that person to take care of her. But it's interesting because this is when you have this moment of Lily says, I'm not great at taking care of myself, after Buffy's basically given her a life. Buffy says that it gets easier, but it takes practice. And we'll get into Lily's transformation into Anne and the Anne story arc and Angel. But oh my God, just watching this scene and really thinking about the rest of her story arc and her being so vulnerable in this episode, being so incapable of taking care of herself, and seeing how capable she becomes of being that person for others. Yeah, it just the scene reads so differently when you understand exactly who this character is, and that Buffy in a lot of ways is the person that sets her on her path, her actual path that gives her identity, that makes her not a no one. And yeah, she looks at the name tag on the uniform that Buffy hands her and says, "Can I be Anne?" And Buffy smiles. And I'm just like, oh. She's
Yep.
She really is truly one of my favorite, just crazy secondary in the background character.
Yeah.
Her story arc's really fascinating for how little we actually get of her.
Yeah. Well, the first time I was watching through the Angel episodes with her in it, every time there was a scene between her and Angel, I would just be like, talk about Buffy. Somebody bring up Buffy. Somebody bring up Buffy. I would just wait for them to do it, and it never happened. I was always a little disappointed that it never happened, but I was always like, mention Buffy, mention Buffy, mention Buffy. I want to see what happens. And then we have the very last scene where Joyce is in her kitchen and she is fixing plumbing under the sink, and she hears the doorbell ring, which I've kind of always thought was odd that Buffy rang the doorbell. And she looks hopeful, and then she's like, no, it can't be. But then on the way to the door, she acts like she thinks it might be again. And opens the door, and there's Buffy. She came home, and they hug each other, and that's the end of the episode.
It's we talked a little bit about Giles's relationship with Hope, but I got so stuck on Joyce being right earlier to be mad at Giles that I forgot to talk about Joyce's relationship with Hope over the summer, and how she has basically probably done this anytime there's been any time the phone has rang, the door has rung, anytime there's been any sign of an outside presence coming into her space. And she even talks about not wanting to leave the house. She is in a lot of ways trapped in this space of just waiting for Buffy to come back.
And see, I can completely see that, because if that was one of my kids, I would never change my phone number. I would never change my address. I don't think I would be able to step away from either of those things, just in case one day they needed me and remembered that address, that phone number. Yeah.
And I think
I can completely see that. I would keep it for decades.
Yeah.
So that part of what she does makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. And you get a couple of glimpses. You get it earlier with Giles, where she has that moment of hope, and then that kind of moment of realization when she opens and it's Giles. And then you have the moments of, well, maybe, where she kind of has that hope again before opening the door, and it's actually Buffy here. But then if you think about bigger picture, that's every time she has that moment of hope and that moment of disappointment, which we talk again about hell being the total absence of hope. And Joyce's continue to hold on to hope that every time the phone rings or the doorbell rings or someone knocks, she has that little twinge of hope and is constantly disappointed, but she hasn't lost that hope yet. I think the hope storyline and the commentary on hope and the idea of losing yourself is kind of a way of abandoning all hope. And I think that there's a lot of stuff that plays really well on that front. I think some of the political messaging could have been handled better or could have been
not quite so awkward.
Yeah, like it's not even that
the way
they were
it was
handled
put in.
Yeah, it wasn't even that it was like bad messaging or like a bad thought of like blending that kind of messaging into this episode that is mostly about hope, because I think a lot of that messaging can intertwine with that, but it was very clunkily done.
Yeah, very.
But yeah, I really like this season opener for a lot of things. I think it's very strong, and I think we talked about it in our Becoming episodes that this is really Becoming part 3 in a lot of ways. This is Buffy dealing with that last thing that she lost, which was herself when she had to kill Angel, and she denied her identity for so long and basically forced herself to abandon all hope and punish herself in all of this over the summer. And then this is her becoming Buffy the Vampire Slayer again. You know, it's definitely another Becoming story. So yeah, I like the way that these 3 episodes work together. You can see the through line very clearly, but then there's some characters that just didn't know what to do with. They're like, well, we know what direction we want to take Buffy in, and we've kind of got ideas for like Giles and Joyce that we're playing with, and like Willow we want to show as being developed, but then like we just have Xander and Cordy being like the worst versions of themselves.
Oh yeah, a little bit.
But that's okay, because Seth Green's now a part of the cast, so he'll bring everything up.
Which he does.
All right, so that's our episode.
That was Anne.
Next week's episode is Dead Man's Party, which we will get to see the Scoobies scream at each other a lot, which will be fun.
Yep, they do that sometimes.
It happens on occasion. And I said next week, but we are every other week now. I have failed in my remembering how our schedule works. But yeah, we'll be back in 2 weeks with Dead Man's Party, and we thank you all so very much for listening. And this is where we say bye.
Bye.